Hello, I'm Will Hodling, and I am thrilled to be the new host of Franklin Covey on Leadership. In this podcast, we hope to bring you the hard-earned insights from many of the world's greatest leaders to help accelerate your own leadership development journey. Today's guest is Marty Dubin, a clinical psychologist, a serial entrepreneur, a business coach and advisor to C-suite executives, and now the author of the upcoming book, Blindspotting: How to See What's Holding You Back as a Leader. In today's conversation, we will cover how Dubin's work as a therapist impacted his business career, the common and most dangerous blind spots that leaders face, his experience identifying blind spots personally and with clients, and the importance of self-awareness in leadership. Marty Dubin, welcome to On Leadership.
Thank you, Will. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Really excited to have you. So you have an impressively diverse career. You were a clinical psychologist in private practice for a decade. You were a startup founder. You were an executive coach. And now you're about to be a published author. I want to talk about a couple of your career transitions over time. And first, going from private practice to startup founder. What convinced you to make that transition? And what was hardest about moving into being a startup founder?
Yeah, we had my private practice, and I noticed healthcare was starting to change, and healthcare was being managed, and so I just got curious about the business part of it, and it just felt at the time like, oh, let me just dabble over here into something that's a little different, and so my identity still, and we can talk about identity because it's a good piece of my book, my identity was still being a clinical psychologist in private practice. And then I found that I was just getting excited and interested in what was going on in the business part of it. So it became kind of a gradual shift. And then the hard part was when it was like, oh, I really now have to decide. The business is taking off, and who am I? What am I going to do? And so I closed my private practice to new patients, and then gradually let it kind of dwindle down and put more and more of the time in the business.
How do you think being a clinical psychologist by training helped you and hurt you as a startup founder in your first venture?
Well, the hurt part's easy. I just didn't know so much about business, and there was a lot to learn, and figuring that out was a challenge. But an interesting part, and maybe this will resonate for any readers that are well versed in psychology and psychotherapy, the concept of transference, which is kind of your patients, see you as they want to see you in terms of important people in their lives. And I realized that even happens in business and in just really any relationship. And so being tuned into, oh, this is more in, I think, in the sales and the customer service part of it. This person wants to see me as the expert, or this person wants to see me as their friend, or I seem like their brother or their cousin or whatever it is. And then not just thinking about that as some small little thing, but realizing that can be a really important part in developing the relationship.
Absolutely. So, before I joined Franklin Covey, I was a startup founder as well. And the startup journey, people often think it's just up and to the right the entire time. But in fact, it's a series of peaks and valleys that one day you feel on top of the world, and the next day you feel like everything is going to hell in a handbasket. Yeah. So I'm curious, your company ultimately was very successful. You grew to 250 employees. You got acquired by one of the largest health systems in the country, healthcare providers in the country. Huge congratulations, but maybe talk me through one of the lower moments of that journey. When were you like, man, this is really not going to work out? And what did you do to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, and I'll answer that with the perspective that I have now, as well as kind of what the experience felt like then. So we had grown quite well, and we had large contracts with large insurance companies. And one of our newest contracts was going south in terms of we were losing money on it, and we realized that how we had bid it was problematic in terms of they hadn't given us really good information, and we were bidding on poor information. And if it had gone on too long, it would have pulled down the entire company. So it was One of these, oh my God, this is an existential threat to the whole company. And I looking back on it, I tried to approach it as, hey, these somebody we're in contract with, we're all in this together, and I'm sure they'll understand and just change the contract, if I explain it. And of course, that's not the way business works. It's like, hey, you signed a contract, talk to us next year when when the rates are up, and we wouldn't have been able to last for the year. So we ended up, my partner. There's a concept, I think, in business of knowing when to be this wartime CEO and the peacetime CEO. I was still behaving as a peacetime CEO, and my partner said, no, we've got to sue them. That's the only way we're going to get this resolved. And we did, and it hurt us in terms of our overall value of the company, but it certainly saved us.
Wow. Okay. So navigating a lawsuit as a wartime CEO, probably going from private practice to being a startup founder, you didn't expect you to find yourself in the courtroom. You were like, I'm not going to be a lawyer as well. But that sounds like quite the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just so much, as you well know, you have to learn in so many areas that you just know nothing about: legal, regulatory, all sorts of things.
Yeah. And so your company was acquired by Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield. You served there as SVP for 3 years. Going from being a startup founder and running your own, 250 person, 50 million revenue company to one of the Fortune 50 biggest companies. This is a little bit of a transition into your book, Blindspotting, but what was the biggest blind spot for you as a corporate VP?
Well, I thought this will be fun. I'm going to learn how you really do business from these big guys, and I certainly learned a lot. But I could tell right away this is just not who I am. I'm much more of an entrepreneur, and the big corporate bureaucracy and all of that, and the slowness of the speed just didn't fit for me. And I remember I was in one meeting with kind of a number of other leaders, and they, like, what do you do? They wanted my title, and I said I was in charge of the product that I was running, and they were like, what do you mean you're in charge of? Nobody's in charge of here. Everybody has a title.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, I'm not suited for this.
Okay, got it. So then you ended up leaving, and then the kind of next major chapter of your career was executive coaching and advisor. You've advised Silicon Valley executives, famous venture capitalists, Fortune 500 leaders. Talk about the difference between coaching and therapy. You've done both. I think a lot of times I heard a joke one time that coaching is just therapy for male CEOs, but maybe there's a big difference there. So talk about the difference between coaching and therapy.
I think there's a huge difference. The things that are the same are, in therapy and in healthcare, you diagnose and treat. In coaching, you assess and develop. So that part of it's the same. Like, what's the problem? Let's figure it out, and what do I need? How do I need to help them? But the leaders I worked with could have been doing anything. They had 10 more things to do in addition to having me on their calendar, and I was very aware that time is money for them every minute, which is very different than a patient coming in with a problem and they're in pain and they want some help. And so the relationship is much more, I think, horizontal, not a vertical relationship like it is often in therapy. And I felt like I needed to deliver every time I met with them. It wouldn't, you end a therapy session, well, I think we've made some progress today. We'll pick that up next time we meet. That's not the way you end a coaching session. It's like, what are the 3 things you're going to do? And then we'll talk, about how well you did those and what the responses were. So and the other part I really liked about the difference, in therapy, you really are, pretty unknown to the patient. But I felt comfortable talking about things about myself with my people I'm coaching with, and that's another way to kind of develop the relationship and learn.
You had a line in there that therapy is vertical and coaching is horizontal. Could you maybe just clarify or explain that a bit more? I thought that was an interesting concept.
Yeah, I think therapists do try to talk about. Some people have made the change of they're not patients, they're clients, kind of trying to make it more of we're equal in the room here, we're both trying to learn. But at the end of the day, one person is coming because they're in pain and the other person is there to help. And that's maybe to a slight extent, that's what's going on with leadership. But leadership, I think coaching is much more similar to coaching, much more similar where it comes from, sports and athletics, where somebody is coming to get better, and they want me to be able to help figure out what needs tweaking, what needs adjusting for them to get better. So it felt like it's a more equal relationship, not a hierarchical relationship like it always felt to some extent in psychotherapy.
Absolutely. I'm sure over the years you've coached many, fascinating, interesting people. Are there any stories that you're able to share? And obviously no names, but any stories of your coaching engagements of kind of insights or changes that your coaching led to?
Sure. So the book is about blind spots, things that we don't realize about ourselves that get in the way. And I look at this as, leaders are where they got where they were or where they are because they're really, really good. And so 90% of the time, 95% of the time, they're on target. But there are that 5 or 10% of times when they're behaving normally in their own mind. This is they're doing the things that normally have brought them good results, and somehow they're not getting good results. And rather than say the problem is the other person or the business or other things in the environment, I think it's important for people to look at themselves and see, are they really getting in the way of the solution? So, maybe one really cogent story on that is I was working with a founder, entrepreneur, super brilliant, and as most entrepreneurs, super high in confidence. You're doing things that haven't been done before, so people are telling you no all the time, and you've got to be able to push through that and not have self-doubt. So a lot of confidence, a lot of curiosity, very open, really wanted to learn and develop new things, and so really fun for his team to talk to because he had great questions and he was a thoughtful person, and also very decisive, which is another characteristic for leaders. You only get so much information, and you got to move and make a decision. Well, all those things were great most of the time, but his team a couple senior leaders had left. A couple others were really having struggles with him. And when I talked to them about it, they said, yeah, he's confident until he becomes arrogant. He's open to new ideas until he's not open anymore. And so in talking with him, that's exactly what was going on. And he didn't recognize it. He certainly did not think he was arrogant. That's not a term he ever would use. I couldn't say, stop being arrogant. But what I could help him with was help him realize that when he thought he had the answer, when he stopped being curious, when he stopped asking questions, he behaved in a dismissive way towards his team. Okay, I think we're done. I'm ready to move on, or he'd just get up and leave, or whatever. And so helping him see that was causing real problems with his team, and the fact that sometimes he didn't always know the answer. And when he could say, you know what, I think I've got the answer, but let me, sleep on it for a few days. Let's meet again next Tuesday and see if we can talk about it again. He was finding that he could be much more open to his team, and sometimes he didn't have the answer, and there was more information that came in those next couple of days.
How did you generate that breakthrough? I mean, if somebody errs towards being a little arrogant and dismissive, it's difficult to say to them, hey, by the way, you're arrogant and dismissive, and they're going to just dismiss that feedback. So how did you break through to this founder?
Yeah, and I know you guys at Franklin Covey know about this a lot, is 360 feedback, or just feedback in general, is so powerful. And that was what the leader wanted, actually, initially. He didn't see any problems. He wanted to get better. And so he said, can you do some 360 feedback with my leaders? And that he's arrogant came through. And in that, and a little bit more kind of descriptive from a few people about that. And I had to then make the connection of that really was his strength that was being overplayed, which got him curious about that. And I think I engaged that curiosity. But it did have to start. The real push had to come from the feedback from his team. He liked his team. He was a likable kind of guy most of the time. And so that bothered him, that his team was in pain about him, even if he didn't agree that he was arrogant. So that was the opening for the breakthrough.
That's wonderful. I mean, and that story of 360 feedback, uncovering blind spots, is a great transition to talking about your book. So you're now entering the next chapter in your career, moving from psychologist to founder to business coach, and now to about to be published author. Your book, Blindspotting: How to See What's Holding You Back as a Leader, will be released at the end of July by Harvard Business Review. So congratulations. Can you give the audience just a quick crash course? In the book, you discuss the 6 leadership blind spots and how to identify them. So could you just give a quick overview of the book?
Yeah, the book is about self-awareness. And when people would ask me what I did as a coach, I had long descriptions and so on. And finally, I realized that's what I do. I help people become more self-aware. And the real tenet for the whole book is that we all can learn lots of things from books on leadership. But you and I could take away from a book about how to run a good meeting the same 5 elements, but you'd apply them differently than I would, just because of our personalities. And really getting people to understand that the leader's personality is the tool for all their leadership to be expressed through. And then we make the kind of, in the book, the move from first you have to be self-aware. Now, what do you need to be self-aware about? And so these 6 areas are a way for people to kind of compartmentalize where the blind spots, where their lack of self-awareness might be getting in their way. And they are, I wanted to use normal everyday language, not psychological terms or scientific terms. So the terms are our identity, our behavior, our traits, our emotions, our intellect, and our motives. And so in those 6 areas across, I think through the book, there's probably 60 or more blind spots that are spread across those 6 areas.
The philosophy and the focus on self-awareness really echoes our philosophy at Franklin Covey about leadership development, that really, to become a great leader, you need to focus first on who you are, your character, and then how you think, and only then the behaviors you do to generate the results you want. So we're definitely philosophically aligned on the importance of self-awareness as the foundation to development. So I think that's great that you anchor on that. As part of the book, you've also generated a blind spot awareness quiz to help people obviously read the book, and then you can complete a quiz. So maybe just share a little bit more about that product, and if people listening want to evaluate their blind spots in those 6 categories, give them a little direction and advice on how to do so.
Sure. You know, the catch-22 of blind spots is, if they are blind spots, how can you find them? You are blind to them. So the book is the first place to start, and each chapter ends with some questions and action items to try to get people to be able to identify blind spots in the 6 different areas. But I knew as I was writing the book that I really wanted to see if we could develop a psychological assessment akin to the assessments that I used in my coaching practice, that are often designed for coaches to work with their clients. And so I worked with a psychological test publisher, and we used an already existing psychological test that's been in the used in psychology for a long time, called the adjective checklist. And we were able to redesign where those factors in the test point, so that they could point towards the 6 blind spot areas. So the test takes less than 10 minutes to take, and you get a report then that says, here's where you're at high risk for blind spots. It might be in your motive area, or it might be in the trait area, and kind of shows you what to think about, what to look at to identify your blind spots.
Wonderful. And where can people find that assessment?
Yep. So 2 places. There's a QR code in the back of the book, and where that'll take you is to blindspoting.com. So you can just go directly to blindspoting.com and work your way to the assessment. There's other content in blindspoting.com that we share in the book and give people an idea about it, but you can find the test right there and purchase it.
Wonderful. In the book, you tell a fascinating story about kind of a Succession-esque scenario, for those who are familiar with the HBO show, of 4 siblings that are all poised to potentially inherit a family business. And then there's a debate about which of the siblings is best to inherit and lead the company. And you're brought in as a kind of coach and advisor. Maybe tell that story and the key takeaways from it.
Sure. So this was a 4 to 5 generation company, family owned company, and they bring their family companies bring their particular kind of strengths and opportunities, and so it was, a legacy company. The name is on family names on the product. So they really were very intent on being very thoughtful about how they move to the next generation. And they had four cousins that all had different strengths. And I use this in my chapter on intellect because the four individuals really were strong intellectually in very different ways. And the point of the chapter is that there is no one way to be smart. It isn't just high IQ. I mean, that'll get you pretty far, but it takes a lot of other kinds of smarts to be able to be successful in business. And that's something I've learned in my coaching work, and I wanted to exemplify that, and this family really presented that opportunity. So there was one of the cousins that was, Ivy League trained, probably 800 SATs, whatever, just super smart guy, very analytical, and could just crunch a ton of information and be very thoughtful about it. There was another family member that was, I call that first one horsepower. The second one I call processing speed. She just could get through data so fast and come up with something and, leave people with, their mouths open like, they had a hard time responding, and right a lot of the time, but certainly not all of the time. But sometimes in business, you just have to be fast and you have to move, and really a strength there. There was another cousin that was creative as could be, and often, the double take when she would say something like, "What are you talking about? And how does that apply?" But she had solved some major problems in the company with her creativity. And then a fourth one that really hadn't done well in school, had kind of bopped around a while, come back in and out of the company, but had what I call kind of street smarts, savvy, business acumen. And he would come up with things that nobody was thinking about, and that the more they thought about it, it's like, oh my God, that is huge. One just real quick example, there was one of their suppliers that was, as it turned out, they figured out was really trying to kind of take some of their business away. And they realized it, and obviously the supplier was doing it to some of the other major producers. And so they were able to kind of be aware of that without kind of tipping their hand, because this one kid really figured that out, and it really put them in a place when that company did kind of make their move. The company I was working with was ready, and they were able to actually grab more market share when that happened from some of the other competitors. So I couldn't figure out who would be the best, because they all really together were the best. There was and using the family multi-generation was really opportune. So uncle, father of them really became kind of the facilitator of all of them being kind of co-CEOs. And doing that, we set it up that way for that generation above to really develop the four of them as a team, or figure out if one of them could actually rise to lead them all. And after I was in touch with them for a couple more years, and it was really working well in that team co-CEO way, which probably only works in a family where their egos are held in check by the fact that, this is a legacy. We're not going to tank the family for 4 generations here, where I've never seen co-CEOs work very well for long periods of time in just regular corporations.
And so now, years later, it's still co-CEOs. It's working.
The business grew, and they actually could kind of create some more divisions, and so they kind of split it up a little bit more and moved it around as families can do. But yeah, and it was great development for all four of them, and respectful of each other.
Got it. That's wonderful. Fascinating. I was expecting the processor. I thought the punchline you were going to say was the processor wins out, but it sounds like they all did it together, which is great. In the course of this book, I'm sure you've also now worked with many other executives that have big blind spots. Any other examples or stories of an executive who you coached to identify a blind spot and overcome that blind spot? You told the great one earlier about the dismissive and slightly arrogant executive, but anything else you could share? Because I find that discovering the blind spot is obviously a huge part of the challenge, but actually sustainably overcoming that blind spot, particularly in stressful moments, is really difficult. So we'd love to hear about an example and then the kind of lessons learned from that example.
Yeah, I think that, I've got examples in the book, and I'll give you one now of overcoming, but sometimes it's it's that recognition that the blind spot is there, and that the situation really can't be changed. And so sometimes there's other kind of changes around it that can still bring success. But just to give you maybe an interesting one is the identity blind spot. I had a leader, an HR executive. Her title was, I think, SVP or EVP of HR, and she wanted the officer role, the chief people officer role, which didn't exist in the company. And the there was two co-founders of this company that had IPO'd and was very successful, and they told her that they just didn't think she was strategic enough to be at that level. And she engaged me to figure that out. She says, "Am I not strategic? I don't really know." Which is a whole nother interesting thing. What is strategic thinking? And
yeah. Or was it a gendered comment as well? But that's a separate. We'll save that for another podcast episode.
So really, the identity for her was the fact that she really didn't identify herself as wanting to be strategic. She was all about getting things done. And that was her identity, was the go-to person to get things done. So of course she didn't appear strategic. And so the fix there was this self-awareness. Then it was a sense of how to let her strategic ability show if she wanted this next level job, and to be able to begin to do that in a very concentrated kind of way, and for her to slow down her go-to strength of just getting things done and not go there for her first response to things. And we had a whole plan around that. In about 6 months, she did become the CPO.
Wonderful. Lovely. So I want to move now to our lightning round. A couple of quick questions before we close out. We are going to end with our traditional final closing question, but quick lightning round. So you live in Colorado and New Mexico. I know you're a big skier. What is your favorite mountain in the country to ski, and why?
Vail. And part of it is I grew up as a kid skiing there, but it's huge, and even though it's very busy, if you know the mountain, you know where to go to kind of avoid the crowds, and the difference in terrain and skill level is just fantastic there. So it's a wonderful place.
Awesome. What is the leadership book that you find yourself referencing or giving out most regularly? And you can't say your own because it's not out yet.
Well, I don't really have one, but I do have one that when I became a coach, as I kind of surveyed the literature, it's one that I really like a lot. So I hope it's still in print. I haven't been giving it out, but it's called Leading Leaders. And it's by a leader who was a law school dean, and then I think the head of a law firm, and I think also head of a private equity firm as well. And it's about how you lead people who don't want to be led. All those other lawyers in the firm don't want the managing partner to lead them around. And it's a really good book on influence, which is a piece of one of my chapters. And it really got me thinking about all the different ways that effective leaders can use their personality for influencing people. When to be the, I told you so leader, or I'm telling you to go do it leader, when to be the leader that's exciting the troops, when to lead from the side, when to lead from behind. And it's a really good, full of stories, really good book on that.
Lovely. If you could coach anyone right now, who would you coach and what would you try to advise them on?
That's a good question. Well, I think probably like most of us, at times our public officials could use some coaching, I think. And I think it's because of this part in my book where I talk about where strengths become overused. I think there are so many leaders that got to where they are in public office that are really strong, and sometimes going to their strength is not the best policy. And I would, I think I would love to be able to help them have more self-awareness and just be able to be more strategic and decisive about when to double down on their strengths and when to kind of back away from it.
Got a diplomatic answer to not name a name, but we'll assume who you were referencing, or maybe not. So our final closing question for you is about a leader who has really influenced you in your life. What lesson you took from them, and if you could speak to them now, what you would say to them?
Yeah, so as you went through my career history, I haven't had many leaders of me because I've been too independent in my own work. But there was one leader I came across in my coaching that I talk about in the book, and he was unbelievable at being able to. One I talk about in the book about how do you know what you don't know. And that's such a big area for leaders. And he had this uncanny ability to kind of walk the halls of the corporation. And I thought he was just being friendly with people, and people would know him by his first name and just felt comfortable walking up to him and talking to him. And he was very friendly, but he was always asking them, what are you working on today? What's bothering you? What's a hard problem? And then when I met with him as a consultant, he treated me that way too. He was asking me these kind of leading questions that got me talking more than kind of just directly solving his problem. And I figured it out later that he was really just, and he was great at having lots of people in his network. He was really just great at acquiring knowledge. And I have lost touch with him, but I know how to get in touch with him. And now that when the book comes out, I want to reach out to him and thank him and tell him where to find himself in the book.
Awesome. Well, my closing challenge to you then will be to reach out to him, send him a signed copy. I'm sure he'll be incredibly touched and appreciative. Speaking of appreciation, thank you so much, Marty, for joining today with Frank and Covey on leadership. It's fascinating to hear about the blind spots that we all face. As you were speaking, they were all kind of jumping around in my mind about, I probably have a blind spot here and a blind spot there, which I'm sure is the intention of the book, for people to read it and to immediately look inward and then think, how can I act differently outwards? So thank you for spending the time to share your insights and taking the time to sit down and write this book. Would encourage everybody to go out. It's coming out at the end of July, and to purchase the book and to be on their own journey of blind spot discovery.
Thank you, Will. Thanks for the conversation, and thanks for the challenge for me personally.
Absolutely. Lovely. Thank you very much. And everybody, we hope you join us next week for another episode of Franklin Covey on Leadership.